Okay, hello, good evening, and welcome to Gŵyl Crime Cymru Festival 2024. I'm Philip Gwynne Jones, and I have the great privilege to be this year's festival chair. As such, my main duty is to have a long list of people to thank, in particular the Welsh Government for the financial support for the festival, for which we are immensely grateful. However, this festival does not happen by itself, and I'm immensely grateful to the hard work put in by Cathy Ace, Jackie Collins, Winnie Davis, Jackie Harrott, Bev Jones, Alison Leyland, Chris Lloyd, Chloe Tilson and everybody at Waterstones Aberystwyth, Sarah Todd Taylor, Sarah Ward and G.J. Williams, and of course our amazing festival administrator, Gail Williams. There is no festival without these people, my lovely colleagues, my lovely friends, and you all have my heartfelt thanks. The philosophy of this year's festival is as it ever was, and it's to showcase the best in Welsh crime writing together with the best in international crime writing. It's about bringing together some of the big stars of the genre together with emerging stars, and of course it's about bringing together readers and authors. My friends and I, we all hope to see you in Aberystwyth next year on the 25th to the 27th of April. In the meantime, we have an amazing programme for you over the next 8 days, and we hope you enjoy it. I'll shortly be handing over to my Crime Cymru colleague and friend, Louise Mumford, who will introduce the first panel. As well as being an amazing writer, I have to thank her for dealing with some ticket issues we had over the past 48 hours, issues that were causing me a mild amount of panic, or to be honest, an enormous amount of panic. Thank you, Lou, for pointing me in the right direction and sorting it out. But before that, I said that one of the aims of the festival is to promote Welsh crime writing. And so at the beginning of every event, we're running a 3-minute crime close-up slot to introduce you all to some of my fellow Crime Cymru members. This evening's crime close-up author is Phil Rowlands, a very fine author, a lovely bloke as well, and I'll allow him to introduce himself. I hope you all have a great time over the next 8 days. Diolch, hwyl fawr. Mwynhewch yr gwyl.
Hi, everyone. I'm Phil Rowlands, as Phil said, and I write psychological thrillers. Artist Sarah Jenkins' son, Ben, and husband Kerry were killed a year ago. Slowly, she is trying to bring her life together. She started to paint again, and in this extract from Siena, she has just offered to give some spare canvas to a man she has just met at an art shop in her village. Sarah sat in the Land Rover, disturbed by Peter Brodsky, and angry that she had let him seduce her into momentary normality. They had only met for a few minutes, too little time to do any harm. Was it? It had taken less time to take away the 2 lives she had cherished above all others. With that reality, anything was possible. And now, uncomprehendingly, this man had found a way into her head. But that was unfair, unwelcome, filled with danger. She didn't want change. She was safe in her insanity. She didn't want reason. There was no place there that wasn't filled with pain. No room for social smiles and warm words. It was her chosen hell, her cold cell of atonement for not being there to save them or not dying with them. That would have been preferable to the constant agony of being alive. She shut her eyes tightly and tried to control the jumbling, razor-edged thoughts. She bit her lip until she tasted blood. It was a controlled and well-known pain. For a moment it worked, and she watched as a woman pulled a small, screaming child out of the chemist's and tried to placate it. But the child battled on, and finally the woman gave in, picked it up, and the tears stopped. Suddenly, without warning, Sarah saw Ben, her beautiful Ben, laughing uncontrollable. Then, as if it were too much for her soul to bear, the snapshot disappeared. Why did she say Brodsky could come? She had allowed no one else into her space, but she'd had no control. It was instinctive. Something deeply buried had for a moment searched for light and been touched by a beam of new life, and could not deny it or return to the moment before. Then sanity came quickly, starkly, and she started the engine and moved into the road. It had seemed hours since she had got into the Land Rover, but the woman and the child had not moved, and the closed sign was still swinging inside the glass door of the shop. It had happened like this since the murders. Time was inexplicable and transient. Nothing stayed very long except the pain. One thought quickly overtaken by the next. One plan conceived, then dismissed with another. Her reality ebbing and flowing in opposites. Laughter with tears, numbness with longing, harmony with discord, life with death. Thank you. That's all, everyone. If you want to know more about Sarah's journey, you'll have to buy Sienna. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the festival, and I'll hand you over to Louise.
Hello, thank you, Phil. That was lovely. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first panel for our festival. What an absolute privilege to be the first panel. And we are going to be talking about things called It's All in the Mind. We're thinking psychological fiction. And as if by magic, my panelists have appeared. We have Liz Webb, we have Bev, aka B.E. Jones, and we have Penny Batchelor. And in the time-honoured tradition, I'm going to tell each of you a little bit about yourselves, and you are going to nod sagely while I do so, and hopefully I don't make any mistakes. So we're going to start with Bev, aka B.E. Jones. You are a former journalist who worked in newspapers and for BBC Wales before you became a media manager for South Wales Police. Now a freelance writer and novelist, you channel your experiences of true crime into dark psychological mysteries. Your sixth thriller, Wilderness, also known as The Perfect Break, published by Little Brown, was a major 6-part series by Firebird Pictures for Amazon Prime TV, starring Jenna Coleman. And your latest thriller is The Beach House, which is your 7th crime novel. Welcome, Bev, to our dark psychological corner of crime fiction. And then we also have Liz Webb. So Liz started out training as a classical dancer, but a back injury unfortunately ended that blossoming career. Fast forward through many jobs, and for 10 years, she performed stand-up up and down the country, that's quite hard to say, to great success. Then she worked as a producer in radio drama for 10 years, but what she really wanted to do was stop producing other people's work and write her own. So she took the plunge and completed the writing course at the Faber Academy in 2019 and started a book. When coronavirus hit, she wasn't working and thought it was now or never to complete her manuscript. Her debut novel, The Daughter, came out in the UK in 2022 with publisher Allison and Busby. And in May no, that's wrong. Yeah, that's right, sorry. And her second novel, The Saved, came out in the UK in 2024, in January. She is currently writing her third. Welcome, Liz. And then finally, last but not least, we have Penny. Penny Batchelor is the author of 2 psychological thrillers, My Perfect Sister and Her New Best Friend, both published by Embla Books. My Perfect Sister was longlisted for The Guardian's Not the Booker Prize in 2020, and Her New Best Friend was described by Love Reading as a white-knuckle tense thriller. She and author Victoria Scott successfully campaigned for Amazon to introduce a disability fiction section in their adults book section, which is quite an achievement. With Claire Christian, Penny co-founded and runs the Keep Festival's hybrid campaign, urging literary festivals to maintain an online presence, as we're doing here, and also co-founded and is a judge of the ADCI Literary Prize for disabled and chronically ill authors who include positive disability representation in their novels. Penny's new thriller, The Reunion Party, is out in June. So what I thought I would do is hand over to the authors to tell us a little bit about their latest book, because they're going to do it much better than I am anyway. So if we start with Bev, if you want to take us through a little bit, you're talking about Wilderness, is it?
I think I will talk about Wilderness, just because I'm looking back over the last 6 months, and the adaptation, as you mentioned, with Jenna Coleman, aired in the autumn on Amazon Prime, and it's still obviously streaming now. So I'm going to have a chat about that while the buzz is still lingering on.
Tell us a little bit about Wilderness. What was it about? For those who may not.
Yeah. Well, I went to the US some years ago. I went on a road trip across America to Yosemite National Park, and I went through Monument Valley, the Grand Canyon, and being an author and being quite strange while everyone else was kind of enjoying the scenery, I thought, oh, this would be a really good place to bump someone off. So I came up with the idea for Wilderness about an unhappy couple who were going on holiday to try and save their marriage after Olivia has discovered her husband has had an affair. Unbeknownst to Will, though, she may have other plans for him out on the open road. She kind of really wants to forgive him, but if she finds she can't, the wilderness that they drive through provides opportunities for them to for her to, let's say, find other alternative means to end their marriage.
Quite a way to deal with marriage problems, really, isn't it, there? And so thanks, Bev, for that. That's brilliant. We will talk a bit more about your inspiration for that book. Also, just as an aside, both Liz and I didn't get the memo that we were to wear pink and green stripy tops today. So in our girl band, we are definitely the backing singers, I think, in this one. So Liz, tell us about The Saved.
Yes, absolutely. So The Saved is my second novel, and it's about a couple called Nancy and Calder who live in London, but they relocate to an isolated Scottish Slate Island off the west coast of Scotland. And it's idyllic for a couple of days, but then Nancy discovers Calder's body in the sea, and he is dead. He's freezing cold, his eyes are fixed, no heartbeat. She can't get him back. The emergency services come, they try to shock him, but he can't be brought back, and everyone knows he is dead. So she travels in the helicopter to the hospital with the body, and she's waiting for the awful news that the absolute love of her life is dead. But then the doctor comes out and says the weirdest thing, and this is a real thing in medicine, which is you're not dead till you're warm and dead. And what that is that if you have a heart attack when you're freezing cold, it's very rare, but you can sometimes be brought back to life because your organs are so cold they need very little oxygen. And this is what happens. The doctors bring him back to life. And Nancy cannot believe that the love of her life has come back 6 hours later. All the doctors are really happy, slapping each other on the back, think it's the most amazing thing. They say his brain waves are fine, everything's fine, although he's got some neural damage. But when she goes in to see him, she looks into his eyes and she doesn't recognize him. His body is the same, but she doesn't recognize the person in front of her. The doctors say there's nothing wrong. So she has to go home back to the island with this man who she thinks is a stranger. That's it.
Lots of dark psychological twists and turns in that one, definitely. And Penny, tell us about The Reunion Party, which is your one that's coming out very soon.
Yes, it's coming out on June the 25th, and this is a world exclusive, really, because I've not told anybody anything about it publicly before. So here goes.
Don't get it wrong.
It's called The Reunion Party because it's 5 friends who are getting together 25 years after their university friend died. After she died after the exams, but before graduation. And they're all getting together at a digital detox hotel, which is the sort of place I'd love to go and stay. No mobile phones, no internet or anything. And it's run by one of the friends. But in their true psychological thriller style. Just because were friends 25 years ago doesn't mean you're going to have anything in common now. And also there are sort of secrets and lies and details about what actually happened to Tanya, the girl that they're all getting together to remember. So it's got lots of twists and turns, and I can't wait for people to read it.
Oh, well, I've had the privilege, obviously, to do this panel of reading well, no, I haven't read the reunion part yet, because that one is obviously under wraps, but I've read your other books, Penny. And I know just how great the writing is in all three. And you all have as well this fantastic sense of place, which we'll get to in a second. But before we get to that, I'm going to ask what kind of kicks off an idea for you. So do you start? I mean, Bev, you've touched on this a little bit in your introduction, actually, because it was the holiday that probably kick-started it. But is it a place? Is it a person? Is it a theme or an idea that you kind of want to talk about and write about a bit more? So Bev, if we start with you, where have you been on holiday lately? What are your other books going to be about?
Yeah, there's a definite theme developing for me here about going on holiday and coming back with book ideas. I think because I worked as a journalist for a long time and as a press officer for even longer, I saw a lot of sort of crimes secondhand, and came up with lots of ideas, but I didn't necessarily have a home for them. And so I think a pattern has developed for me where I go somewhere lovely, and then I naturally think, well, I remember that idea that you had, this is where that could happen, this is where it naturally situates itself. So that happened with Wilderness. With the beach house, I went on holiday to Oregon, to the wonderful sort of Pacific Northwest coast, all the crashing surf and little villages. And yeah, came back with a sort of an idea of a woman who is relocated to that wild place to reinvent herself from South Wales, sort of running away from a past incident, really. I think there's just something for me really interesting about taking characters out of their natural setting and seeing kind of what mischief or trouble they can get into when they're out of their element. And you can sometimes, you can be a bit different when you're on holiday. You can put a different side of yourself forward or rediscover elements of yourself that you've forgotten. And it actually, listening to Penny and Sue talk, it sounds like it's really dangerous to go away now. You might as well stay at home, because it seems terribly dangerous to be out and about, even with friends or loved ones.
Yeah, exactly. Don't. But that's with psychological fiction, isn't it? It's this idea of putting these characters under this intense pressure. Ordinary characters, they're not really members of the police force or anything like that. Normal characters under intense pressure, and see just how interestingly they snap. Is basically psychological. In
some ways, Wilderness had that element, because when you're on a holiday with somebody and you're in a car with somebody you see every day of your life, part of the sort of tagline for the book was, what if the most dangerous thing out there is already sitting next to you in the seat, in the car, and has plans. So yeah, I think it's that pressure that either comes to a head or has been simmering for so long that it explodes.
Yeah, definitely. So Liz, what about you? What kind of kickstarts? Because you've got this fantastic island that you write about, or was it the medical thing? Was it the you're not, what was it? You're not dead until you're warm and dead.
Warm and dead. Yes, absolutely. For me, it was the medical thing, and people always say that it's a waste of time scrolling on social media, but I find loads of ideas on social media, and the more you look weird, morbid things, the more social media sends them back to you. And I found this story and a short film about it, which is a real thing that happened in 2011 in Denmark. These teenagers were on a school trip. Obviously, there was clearly no health and safety, because their boat overturned in the freezing cold weather. A few of them managed to swim to shore. The teacher said, swim now, because you've got like 3 minutes to save yourselves. But 7 of them died, and their bodies were recovered. Their parents were told they were dead. The bodies were taken to a medical place and the guy that ran it had heard about this thing called hypothermic cardiac arrest. And he did exactly what happens to my character in the book. He put them on life support, fed the blood out of their bodies, reoxygenated it, warmed it up and put it back, and they all came back. And I thought that was the most fascinating thing. The idea that, well, first of all, the awfulness for the parents that they thought their children were dead. But then all of the young people that came back said they were changed by the event, by the knowledge that they had died, and they saw film of themselves when they were dead. And I thought, God, that's just the most bizarre thing. And then so first of all, that was a brilliant story, but also it really related to me because when I was young, I was quite a morbid child, and I was obsessed with death, not in a weird way, but I thought consciousness was such an amazing thing. The idea of being not conscious, I couldn't get over it. I used to hide under the covers when I was about 6 or 7 and imagine not being, and then wake myself up when I was, and so this story really related to me. So it totally inspired me to write this book. Yeah.
Something I wanted to ask you is, you've got a background in stand-up comedy, but you don't write comedy. But you're writing these very
first
dark...
book actually has a darker comedic voice, and then I decided with this one to slightly pull it down. There are moments of sort of, all my characters have slightly dark, sarcastic voices, and I really like that. I mean, because I like writers like, you know, Gillian Flynn, people like that, who like, not her most famous books, but things like Dark Places and things like that. I like psychological crime, but with a voice that is incredibly kind of sarcastic and almost comedy, but still in the genre of psychological crime. Yeah.
It just goes to confirm my suspicion that all comedians are a little bit dark anyway.
Absolutely.
They're all a little bit, they're all a little dark. Penny, tell us now, what kind of kickstarts it for you? Because in this new book, you've got the digital detox place. So is it that, or is it the characters that set it off for you?
Well, there's a few things. I mean, firstly, I'm from Yorkshire. So my first book's set in Yorkshire. My second isn't, but this one, the hotel, is in Yorkshire. It's sort of, I don't live there anymore, but it's a county that I love. And the digital detox thing, it's sort of a bit of a device to make the story a bit more interesting, because if people have got mobile phones, well, they can just ring the police straight away. So it's a way to add more sort of tension and twists and turns. But I get my ideas from loads of different places. Sometimes just daydreaming, things will pop up in my head, or I'll see things in the news, things like that. And I do love writing about women who don't sort of fit the normal feminine kind of ideal. And I tend to come up first with the inciting incident, as we might call it, the sort of the thing that happens that sets off the rest of the story. And I'm just fascinated with the idea that everybody has a fatal flaw. There's something that could turn all of us to become a murderer or to crime. But thankfully, none of us are ever in those situations. But sometimes, occasionally, there's a character who's in an extraordinary situation and they make the wrong decision, which they think is the right decision at the time, but then it just spirals into them getting further and further down that dark, dodgy road. And yeah, I just love thinking, well, why do people do that? What's going on in their heads? And the idea, particularly with the reunion party, that you think you know somebody, but do you actually know them at all? Or are you only seeing what they want to show you?
Yes, exactly. Well, that leads me nicely on to my next question, actually, which is a bit more character based, because we're thinking of psychological fiction. It's always about who to trust. Who do we trust? Who do we not trust? And it can change through the novel as well. So I'm thinking about, have a think about your characters, and did you know that some of them were going to be untrustworthy from the start? And how difficult is it also to write the untrustworthy characters? Do you kind of seed it along, or do you suddenly realize and then have to go back? So Bev, if we start with you, some of your untrustworthy characters, or how hard it is to write these characters, where do you start, and do you always know that they're not to be trusted?
Yeah, I mean, because I tend to write almost all my novels been in the first person, so they're from the inside of the head of that you know, unreliable narrator, as we call them. I think I like playing with that idea of, as Penny mentioned, really, women that perhaps don't quite fit the stereotype or the norm of, you know, whatever that may be these days. But I like to give them a voice, you know, like Liz said, that is quite spiky and strong. And
that came through really well in the adaptation as well, I thought. The
I think
voiceover.
so, yeah. I think Jenna Coleman really nailed Liv's kind of turmoil and the voice. And they did use a little bit of, when you've got, because when you write in the first person, you've got the voice of the character talking about all their thoughts and feelings. You couldn't have a voiceover over a whole of a TV adaptation, because that would be crazy. It would just get in the way. But they kept some of the original sort of comments from the book, and they used it as a narration over the top to kind of pinpoint things that were going on in Liv's head, which worked well. Because I think whenever you're telling your own story, you are bound to be untrustworthy from the off, because you always think you're, as you said, you know, doing the right thing. You don't think of yourself as a bad person. You might realize that you make mistakes, but you justify the things that you do so that they become, in your mind, you know, they're reasonable. So by definition, that is an untrustworthy narrator, because, you know, we all like to show that side of ourselves and try to not cast ourselves in a villainous way. Then, of course, you know, the reader can realize, I think, as you go along, that maybe this person's point of view is quite skewed, and hopefully you carry them along with the flaws of that narrator, which you know, I think Jenna Coleman managed really well in the case of Wilderness. And the audience reactions to that character were kind of great to see. Some people, you know, loved her. Other people were quite scared, and other people were sort of thought that the book, the adaptation was kind of advocating murdering a cheating husband. So I think, you know, I wouldn't say it did advocate that. I think it was saying that this was a situation where she was trying to convince herself that perhaps it was a good idea. So I think, yeah, you can let the reader or the viewer do the work in deciding who to trust if you kind of get that balance right and surprise them.
Well, you've had the unique position of seeing watchers, not readers, I guess, watchers of the show, kind of almost in live time. Kind of, you get Twitter comments, or X, or whatever it's called now. You get those comments. How strange is it to see people's opinions change of your character? Did you even do that, or did you kind of stay away from it?
Well, I think, you know, I am quite active on social media, but I think you also have to be aware that it's a medium where people just splurge all their thoughts and feelings. You can't take it too personally. I have to say that the show, the fans of the show have been fantastic. So many people reached out to me from across the world, that kind of loved it. You know, they're super fans and they just loved the show. And then there were the people that had a bit to say about, you know, about the morality of it, shall we say. And you take it all with a pinch of salt, and you know, people react. That's the great thing. People react differently, and you want to entertain and you want to kind of challenge people maybe a bit and get that conversation going. And you know, if somebody is willing to have an argument about something, you probably got it right, because you've hit that little nerve, and it's, yeah, let's you know.
You'd rather that than indifference.
Absolutely.
So Liz, you've got in the Saved, you've got the brilliant position of a character coming back to life and who then becomes very different to their partner. So talk us a bit through that kind of process, and did you kind of always know where the story was heading?
I sort of knew generally where it was heading, but sort of. So the doubt in this book is very much about, she thinks, as I do about my lovely husband, oh, I totally love him, I totally know him, there's nothing that could break us apart. And that, of course, is the most dangerous thing you could possibly think, because then you always think, what is the one thing that would break you apart? In the book, it's set on a slate island, and slate is a big theme, because slate is this substance that is really hard and it's used on roofs and things, but when you break it, you can never put it back together because bits shear off. And that is a metaphor for the relationship they have. She thinks they've got a rock solid slate relationship, but when he comes back and he's different, it starts to unravel. One, because of his behavior, things he does in the present, things she discovers about the past, things he discovers about her. And it's about what is the one thing that would absolutely break up a perfect relationship. And she is, so there's the doubt about who he is, and through her, we start wondering who he is. And then there's the doubts about her. And as you said, I'm an ex-stand-up comic, and I've got a typical stand-up comics personality, i.e. ridiculous overconfidence and spectacular self-doubt with nothing in between. And I ricochet between the two. And that's perfect for writing those kind of characters where you're one thing one minute, one thing another. You don't know what you think. You don't know if you trust yourself. You don't know if you trust others. So I find writing those kind of characters, I like writing those kind of characters. And all my main characters are thinly disguised versions of parts of me. As you know, my husband reads my books and goes, oh my God, it's you again, it's you, another part of you. And then as far as red herrings with all the other characters, the baddie in my book was originally the goodie. And so I'm hoping that was quite a good thing, because the first half I wrote as if he was a nice character, and then I changed my mind and turned him around. And then at the end, I put a big thing up on the wall, I put all the characters up, and then I completely scientifically added lots of red herrings for all the characters.
Yeah, it's lovely when that happens, when you've got a character that's been one way and then suddenly you realise yourself
absolutely
not that.
Yeah.
Because then you manage to write it so authentically.
Yeah, absolutely.
We won't ask Bev if she's anything like Liv. We'll just quietly move on from that, just in case.
I do get people being a little bit scared of me sometimes now, because inevitably there's a small part of you in everything you write.
Yeah.
But I never answer that question on grounds I may incriminate myself.
Yes, probably best. So Penny, moving to you, your characters. Now you've got a lovely situation where it's this reunion party. So you've got the difference between how people are projecting themselves and how they really are. And how much did you know about your characters and which ones were going to be the wrong ones?
Oh, well, firstly, I'm just making a note to myself never to get in a car on my own with Bev.
No. She offers a holiday.
The only person that said that.
She offers a holiday, you're busy. Okay, you're busy on whatever date she wants to go on holiday with you.
I would love to write a character who's out and out bad, because I haven't actually done that yet. Because when I know there's a character who is going to do rather amoral things, I always try and understand why, that psychological reason behind the way that they're acting, and as Bev said, how they can justify it to themselves, because none of us like to think that we're horrible people. So sometimes people will think that their behavior is justified and reasonable, and whereas an external person certainly wouldn't think that. But yeah, writing the characters, it can be hard, particularly with my second book. There was a character in there, I don't want to spoil the plot for anybody who hasn't read Her New Best Friend, but I wanted her to be very dodgy. But the more I wrote her, the more I actually quite liked her and was sympathetic, and I rather wanted her to get away with it. And my editor had to say, no, dial back. And that was a bit the case with the reunion party as well. I quite sort of like writing people who don't conform to the rules. Maybe that's because I do conform to rules, so it's sort of quite cathartic writing people who don't. Can get my evil side out on the page.
Well, that's why they say that crime fiction writers are such lovely people in real life, because you get all the horrible stuff out, through our imagination, and then we just rays of sunshine, absolute rays of sunshine in real life. It's what we are.
Like personal therapy, isn't it?
It is, definitely. I think romantic novelists must be just awful in real life.
I've heard this.
So nice. All the time. Everything's got to be sunny and happy and lovely in their books. So they're, probably doing something awful in real life. So moving on, I'm going to move on now to the idea of twists and turns, because that's a big part of psychological fiction. And I read a tweet from Marianne Keyes quite a while ago now. I think it was about, I would say it's probably about a year ago. And she was bemoaning the way twists have become such an expected thing in thrillers in particular. She'd been reading this unnamed thriller. at the expense of characterization. So I don't think this applies, obviously, to the books that we're talking about here, but how much do you feel under pressure to put these kind of twists and turns in? And also, do they come from the character themselves, or do you often feel that sometimes you're reading something, you think, all right, I need to shush this up. There needs to be a twist, and you'll add one in. So Bev, what's your process when you come to thinking about twists and turns, and have you been put under pressure to kind of put them in?
It's a tricky one, because I think, I think most readers read a lot of crime fiction, and I'm read a lot of crime fiction myself. I always have. It's quite hard after a while to try and find something that's startlingly new and original, because there's only so many people it could be, or how someone could get killed, or the dark secret that they've got. So I think there's always a possibility that you're going to end up, doing something that's been seen or done before, but you've got to try and find a way to make it that little bit different. And if it doesn't come from the character, I think the readers can tell if something has been sort of shoehorned in there because for the sake of a shock, because readers are quite sophisticated. So it's got to be something that feels organic, at least, so that you're not suddenly taken by surprise. I think with most of mine, I haven't necessarily felt a great deal of pressure to think, oh, I've got to shove something, really unexpected and dramatic in there. Though that said, I suppose, most of my novels have got a surprise. I think I prefer to use the word surprise or shock rather than a twist, because a twist can be quite contrived. And if you've got a strong premise, especially something like Liz's sort of, oh, that thing that you don't necessarily then need something super showy. If you can take the reader along with you, and hopefully, keep them guessing without having to suddenly go, ta-da, Luke, I am your father, or something kind of that obvious. So yeah, I think I like twists. I love a good twist, but I'm quite hard to surprise now because I have read so many novels from over so many years.
So yeah, I totally agree. I think that's a really sensible way of putting it, actually. And I would hope that in my books, the twists or the surprises or whatever we're calling them would come from the character. So Liz, what about you? How do you feel about twists? Do you think that readers expect them as well?
I mean, I think there's so many different types of books and so many different ways to do it. I'm not a big fan of those absolutely massive twists. When you're reading and then you realize the character you're reading isn't the character you thought it was, or suddenly you thought it was real life and then it's all crazy,
the character's dead. I read a spate of books where the character who looked as if they were alive, they were interacting with people, and they were dead.
They're an inanimate object. I read one and they were an inanimate object. I was like, oh, come on. But having said that, there's always books that do work like that. Like, I don't really like books that start like this and then are supernatural, but then I love Stephen King's Pet Sematary. I mean, that's one of the most fantastic books. I think anything works if you do it well enough. But you're right, what you were saying, it's got to come organically. It's got to rise from the story. So my books don't have those ridiculous twists, but I think you do in psychological crime, you do need surprises, like Bev said. You need surprises, because the whole thing that people love about psychological crime, whether it's a slow burn or whether it's they want to be pulled along by the plot. That's why I like psychological crime so much. So you do need, surprises. I think that's a better word than twists. And sometimes I find I have a good idea of what the big twist will be in the middle, but then you do have to crank them up, I think, from the middle onwards, because you want to keep people's interest.
Yeah. And Penny, what about you? Are you a plotter or a pantser? Do you put these twists in beforehand, or are you kind of desperately adding them in later?
Oh, well, I'm becoming more of a plotter. Not in I know every chapter before I write it, but I do like to know what my beginning, middle, and end is going to be now before I start writing it. And I just think that character is king. You need the plot, and you need to have good plot, because it's psychological thriller. Readers expect the conventions of the genre, and if there weren't any red herrings or twist surprises, then I think they would be rather disappointed. But readers aren't stupid. They can totally see when something's just been shoehorned in just to make a surprise, when it's completely out of character for the person who's doing it. And those sort of things, I think, should be picked up by the editor, really, before the book is actually published. So, yeah, I think twists are really important. Most of them I've thought of before I actually get writing. And if I don't know what's going to happen, then I think maybe I shouldn't be writing that story, because I do sort of need the twist to be really natural and part of the story, not something just added in for a bit of sort of show. But sometimes I do, as I'm writing, something else sort of comes in my head, and perhaps at the end I might go back and think, oh yeah, that'd be really good if I added this extra thing in. But don't have too many, because I've read books where there's just too many twists, and you lose the sense of the plot and the character, and it takes you out of the world that you're in. You just think, nah. Spoils your enjoyment, really. So it's about getting the optimum amount.
I think you've got to give the reader a fighting chance as well, haven't you? They've got to, if they look back to the book, they could pick up things that you kind of put in. You know, they may not have done it as they were reading, but when they go back, they could definitely work it out. So you're not kind of shortchanging them in any way.
Definitely. I always sort of think that when I read other thriller writers' books, if I haven't seen it coming, then I know that they've done it well, because I sort of know the tricks of the trade. And then daft things like people of a certain age may remember, was it Dallas, when Bobby suddenly came back to life in the shower, and the whole series had just been a dream. What the? You know, just don't bother.
Yes, he stepped out of the shower, didn't he? And it was all a dream.
Yeah, the whole past series had just been a dream.
And that's true of your book, Louise, The Hotel, that you had certain twists that I didn't see coming at all. And then when I went back, I thought, oh yeah, no, now I can see it was seeded in. It's a very good book. Yeah, and the twists at the end, you think, oh God, now I get it. But you can look back. It works really well.
And I formulated my own ideas about what I thought might happen, and they were completely wrong. And so that was, brilliant. Because part of the fun of reading is actually telling about yourself, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. That is part of the fun of crime fiction, is trying to spot and trying to get ahead of the author, isn't it? Oftentimes, the twists in mine that work the best are the ones that were a surprise to myself when I was writing them. Oh, this has happened. That's exciting. I have no clue what I'm going to do with it, but it's happened now, so I may as well just carry on with it. So I know that in a couple of minutes, we're going to introduce Phil back on our screen, who's going to have some questions from our audience, hopefully. But I've got a little bit of time just before then. And I do want to talk a little bit about kind of for Bev, it's a dream scenario that's come true. But for the rest of us, it's a dream scenario that is yet to come true. The idea of our work becoming a screen adaptation. So it's a slightly different question for Bev as to the rest of you. The rest of us even. Bev, what was the process like? Talk us through a little bit about kind of seeing your characters and your story on screen. And were there any kind of changes made, and how much control did you have?
Well, I think, I had a great experience with Firebird Pictures. They picked it up, they optioned it, they ran with it. COVID got in the way a bit in the first lockdown, but other than that, I think lots of authors maybe get something optioned, it sits around for quite a long time, nothing much happens with it, and then the option lapses, and you'd never get to see what could become of it. Where it was different for me, it's the first time I went up to London to meet the team. They handed me a draft script of episode 1, and I got to read it on the train on the way home and see kind of exactly how Marnie Dickens, the fantastic writer, was kind of interpreting it. But from early on, I think that you're not gonna, an adaptation is not a transcription, so they're not going to follow the book chapter by chapter or anything. but I felt all along that it was going to be in safe hands, because they always said they wanted to keep the DNA of the character and the story. And they did make, you know, quite a few changes, which surprised me in places. But on the whole,
I think slightly different, wasn't it? I'm right.
Well, the end is different. So
yes.
if you've read the book or seen the show and you get around to the other one, you will have a different experience towards the end.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, I was very pleased with what they did, because I think the show, even though it is still My Wilderness, it's become another version of it as well, and it works in and of itself as a show that people have to watch over 6 episodes and engage with. And you know, they beefed up some of the characters. They introduced a little bit more of Olivia's mum in the TV show, which worked really well to give a bit of a background to the characters. So I think you when you get a good writer, that you can trust them a little bit to flesh out all the parts that you can't put in a book, because you're talking in your own head in a book. So yeah, they cast some brilliant actors, and I had a fantastic experience with them. I think my experience was probably quite unusual, because I know there are authors out there that have hated the adaptations of their books so much that they've refused to even have their name on the credits. Whereas I had that kind of little excitement when I saw V.E. Jones pop up under the Wilderness credits. And yeah, fantastic. Taylor Swift was singing the theme tune to the show. I mean, you can't expect that in your wildest dream. So yeah, I would be completely ungrateful if I said I hadn't had a really good experience with it all. But I think, you know, for many authors, it's not perhaps the usual experience.
No, it sounds like an absolute dream. But if I ask Liz and Penny, when I get to Penny, what would be your ideal cast list for some of your main characters? And would you want to get involved with writing the screenplay? Is that something that would interest you?
So I was doing fantasy casting yesterday, and I decided on I would love to have Richard Madden, who plays Robb Stark in Game of Thrones. He's too clean cut in The Bodyguard, but in Game of Thrones, he's all swarthy and dark. And although he's a hero, nice character, he is ruthless in the war. So he'd be perfect. Also, he comes from Renfrewshire, which is to the side of Glasgow, which is really near where the island it's set. So he'd be good at the accent. And then for the girl, for Nancy, I thought Lily James, who plays Lady Rose in Downton Abbey, but mainly because I saw her in the remake of Rebecca, and she's so good in that, at being first of all naive and lovely, and then really doubting and confused. And then for the sort of evil priest, I wanted to have Christopher Eccleston, because he's good at being very charismatic but quite creepy. And would I want to write it? Yes, in the sense I was a producer in radio drama at the BBC for 10 years, and I've done a lot of script editing. But no, in the sense that my friends who are script writers, they have so much less control than novelists. Novelists, you can be a complete control freak like me and just control everything. They have to take on notes from everyone. They have no control. It's really hard. So I think I would be in 2 minds. I'd like to co-write it probably.
Yeah, that is a very good point, actually. And Penny, what about you? Who would you like to cast in your fantasy casting, or would you like to write the screenplay?
Well, I'd love to have a bash at writing a screenplay. I think that when I do write my books, I do see them quite visually in my head, but it is different skill. So I guess I would have to have a mentor, somebody to actually show me the ropes to do it.
Christopher Nolan, maybe, just somebody really, really great director.
Got, 10 minutes here and there just to help me out. For the reunion party, I think it would be good to have sort of people who aren't really in the public eye as yet. So you're not sort of looking at it and seeing the actor and judging them on what they've been in before. But I do think there's a character called Adam, and I do think Ralph Little would be really good for him. The chap who was on Death in Paradise.
Yeah.
And my second novel, I was thinking about it, Her New Best Friend. And there's a character, Audrey, who I think Lisa Hammond would play her. She was in EastEnders for quite a while.
Yeah.
And then I'm aiming high for the other main woman in the book. She's called Claire, and I'd like Jodie Comer. I think she'd be brilliant.
Oh, Jodie Comer's brilliant in everything.
Yeah,
isn't
so
she?
Jodie, yeah, if you've got your own production company, just option the book, yeah, star in it, and yeah, I'll come and write it for you, love. I'll write the screenplay.
Well, I think now I'm going to welcome back, call him down from the ether. I'm going to call him Phil, if you can hear me, appear, and also I'd like to see you on screen. And you are going to give us some questions from the audience, hopefully. So I'm hoping that Phil is going to magically, I was talking slowly,
There we
hoping
go.
he would appear, and there you are.
Right, okay, we have a ton of questions, What I'm going to do, I'll ask the ones which I think can be answered fairly quickly. And if I don't get to your particular question, then I do apologise. It's just that there are so many of them, which is brilliant. But the first one we had tonight was from Alex Foley, our friend Alex, who says, "Hi all, psychological thrillers are about scaring and surprising your reader. What scares and surprises you?"
I'm quite scary in the morning. I don't like mornings. So I think if my husband was answering this, it would be me at 9 o'clock. What
There you
about
go,
anyone
Alex.
else?
Yeah, Louise's husband. Yes, Jace. Okay,
I think for me, loss of loved ones, I think is a big thing, and that's a big theme in my next book coming up. I think, people think love is such a brilliant thing. You don't want to love people because then the horror of losing them. So I think that is a good thing. And so you're loved. I think awful things happening to yourself, you can deal with. Awful things happening to your loved ones, that is one of the things that scares me most. And I would do anything to stop it. Yeah.
Sending the first draft of a new novel to my agent is what terrifies me. Because he's a formidable gentleman, and I just wait impatiently to know if it's going to be a yay or a oh no.
Are you in that position at the moment, Bev? Have you?
I am, yes.
Oh, Penny?
Well, good luck, Bev. I think for me, it would be being completely in a situation that was out of my control, such as being banged up for a crime I didn't commit and nobody believing me. That sort of nightmare thing that sort of have in your dreams. One I have quite regularly is I have to do my A-levels again, and I've completely forgotten everything, and I'm there in the exam and I don't know what to do, or I'm in a play and I haven't read the script, so I've got to make it up. That kind of thing, totally out of your control.
Okay, terrific. Right. Next one's from Brunhilde 44. In psychological thrillers, is there an optimum time for introducing the death? Do you do it early on, or do you keep it until later to hit them with more of a surprise? Interesting question, I thought.
I guess it depends on how many deaths there are, isn't it, really?
I think you've got to have things happening quite early on, big questions and big nerve-wracking things, not necessarily the death.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good question whether you even have to have deaths in psychological crime. I kind of like to have one or two, but I tend not to have them really early on. But I do know you've got to have creepy, weird things happen and set up big questions from early on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've started mine with the death and worked backward. Others times, I keep one tantalizingly going towards the middle, and then sometimes it's quite good to sort of if you've only got maybe one or two deaths, you can surprise someone, no spoilers, about who is going to be bumped off. So I think you don't have to have a murder, but so you have to keep. There has to be the threat of something very serious there from early on.
I think that it depends on the plot, really. You do need to jump in straight away and grab the reader's attention. So sometimes you might have a prologue, so the reader knows that there is going to be a death, and you've got that, oh, well, who is it? And who's going to die and who's going to do it, sort of thing. But then other times, say, for example, my first novel, it's all about a woman who disappeared when she was 16, and we don't know what happened to her. So finding out who committed the murder, if there was a murder, that's all part of the plot. So it depends on what your story is, really.
Okay, thank you all. The next one we have is from Gwen Clian, who says, is there a temptation to add in comedy moments in the middle of a scary psychological thriller?
I guess Liz needs to answer this
There's gotta
one.
be one for Liz.
I think it's good to have scenes, not necessarily comedy moments, but light and shade. You can't be da 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 all the way through. I think you create more tension by having moments of where the characters almost feel happy for 10 seconds. So I think that's good. Personally, I like having dark, sarcastic comedy voiceovers. I think out and out comedy would be a bit difficult, but it might work really well because it would make the reader relax. And then if you hit them with something scary or stressful afterwards, it might work. Yeah, I think you can do anything as long as it works well, but I think you've got to be consistent with style. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that light and shade is important, isn't it?
And you've got to not confuse the reader with what genre they're reading, because if it's a thriller and then suddenly it turns into a comedy, you sort of might think, well, I'm not quite sure what I'm doing, so what I'm reading. So it's about getting the balance right, as Liz said.
Okay, we've only got a couple of minutes left, but Sarah Todd Taylor says, in the hotel, which I loved, Louise gave us Agatha Christie meets Stephen King.
Oh.
Which two writers would the other authors like to combine? That's a big one.
Somebody already called my third novel halfway, sort of, and then there were None Meets Misery. So I had the Agatha Christie Stephen King mashup. They're always great because you've got the sort of intricate plot, but you've also got that little bit of, oh, anything horrible can happen. So it's hard to beat that Stephen King Agatha Christie mashup, I think.
Got a bit of Daphne du Maurier in there as well. I'd like that. Agatha Christie come Daphne du Maurier, I think.
And I think I'd like a bit of Gillian Flynn, who I love, and then with Ottessa Mossberg, is that how you say her name? Who wrote Eileen? That kind of real darkness. So a sort of sarcastic voice, but then with real darkness as well. I'd like them mashed up.
That's good.
Okay, we're doing very well here. Possibly we have time for just one more, but we'll see how we get on. And this is from Manuela Williams. After what we've all discussed this evening, do you think you could kill someone under the right circumstances?
Yes,
there's a
totally could. And in fact, my next book is about someone who is, because of something that happens to one of her loved ones, hatred drives her to plan to kill someone. And I think, yeah, if something happened to one of my loved ones, I could kill. Definitely.
Yeah.
I think it is possibly in us all. It would take a certain set of circumstances, and I don't think I would know until that moment. As you said, that the circumstances might combine. Because I think we all are capable of something like that, but what would it take to bring us to that point where we would actually do it?
And that's the sort of thing that I really like exploring in my books. I don't think I could be a cold-blooded killer planning a murder, but if someone was coming for me and I needed to defend myself, then I think I probably could.
I do boxercise classes, so if
you have killed
come towards me, as long as there was a certain track playing, certain music, and they stood very still, I could cause some damage.
Maybe.
Okay, and we have one from Louise, who's writing as Marion Colvin. Simply, what in your life made you decide to write, and why psychological crime writing in particular?
To make the voices in my head shut up, because once they're out on the page, then they shut up.
Anyone else?
I think it's a form of diary writing for me, getting all my thoughts and all my mad thoughts and my ridiculous OTT voice out on the page, I think. And why crime fiction? Because I really like plot. I like tension. I like things that roll along. I send my book group that I'm in absolutely mad. If we read a book without plot, I'm like, no, absolutely not. Yeah, so crime fiction, because it's so plot driven and so much tension.
I like psychological thrillers, because it's working out how people think and why they do things. I didn't really well, I made a decision that I wanted to actively try and be a novelist, but I've always written. It's just part of me, and I think that's come from having read from a really early age and being brought up with books, really. It's just part of me.
Terrific. Well, we have more questions and we could stay here for quite a long time yet, but we probably haven't got time, I'm afraid. But thank you for all those questions. It's been great. And for all your comments, people have really enjoyed this panel, and that's terrific.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. I'd just like to end by saying thank you to Bev, to Liz, and to Penny for your brilliant, thoughtful answers. Thank you to our audience for watching. We really appreciate it. Can I remind you that there is an in-person, real-life crime fiction festival in Aberystwyth next year, and it will be the 25th to the 27th of April. Please do sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already to have details of that when it comes through. And I think that's where we end and say good night. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.